Welcome to the Money to the Masses podcast, putting you in control of your finances. It's a good thing podcasts are free, as this one isn't worth a penny. Here are your hosts, Damien Fay and Andy Leakes.
Now, Damien, before we get on with this week's podcast, you had something quickly to say about our sponsors.
Yeah, we've got a new sponsor, Money Farm, and Money Farm are an online investment advisor and one of the biggest digital wealth management companies in Europe. So a big thank you to them for sponsoring the podcast. Now, Money Farm create portfolios to maximise long-term returns using ETFs to make incredibly cheap portfolios. And you even get the first £10,000 of your portfolio invested without any charge from Money Farm. And if you enter the code MTTM20K into the box when you sign up, you get the first £20,000 of your portfolio invested and run by moneyfarm.com without any charge.
Great stuff. On with this week's show. Hello and welcome to episode 123 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fay, and me, Andy Leakes. Damien, how you doing?
I'm good, Andy. I'll caveat that with I do have a headache as well, but I'm going to be my usual cheery self despite it, because it is self-inflicted.
Okay, so, I mean, do we want to go there, or was there a celebration? Are you happy to, or should we just move on?
No, I don't mind. We had a minor celebration yesterday to... Actually, one of the pieces I'm going to talk about today, in fact, that is an anniversary, an important anniversary for Money to the Masses, and in particular 80/20 Investor. And it was the 2-year anniversary of me running my £50,000 portfolio live to the world. So I'm going to talk about, in today's podcast, how I turned £50,000 into nearly £60,000 in 2 years. And
then spent the profits in one night in the pub.
Wouldn't that be great? But that is the point, because it's important to do that piece, and I don't talk about 80/20 enough, really, and people have pointed that out to me. But the key point of that exercise of the £50,000, I put my neck on the line. And you have to say that 2 years ago when the market was at a high point and I decided to invest that money live for 80/20 Investor members, where I was putting my money where my mouth is, to put it bluntly, which is one of the reasons why people like it, because of the transparency. It could have gone wrong. I mean, obviously, I didn't think it would do. Obviously, I wouldn't have done it. But
yeah, if memory serves, I mean, there were lots and lots of tricky things that were happening just after you invested that money. I think China pretty much happened almost immediately once you invested, and then it was followed pretty swiftly by the Greece problems. So you had a lot to tackle.
We had China's stock market rallied incredibly and then blew up. And in part that was because of the currency devaluation over there. We had Europe looking like it would implode over Greece. There was Brexit, of course. There was Donald Trump election that was a surprise. There was a whole host of things. There was a big market crash last year when everyone was worried that about global growth. So there was a whole host of things that when I started that people would have thought I was mad. And so I was almost forced into having a minor celebration just to sort of chink glasses and say, yeah, brilliant that we made it. And I'm going to tell people about what happened and how I did it. So that's going to be an interesting piece for people. That's why I have a slight headache today. But the other thing we're going to talk about today, Andy, I know you didn't ask me that question, but I'm going to tell you anyway, is that we promised a bit of a budget special, because there was a budget this week, wasn't there? We're going to touch upon that. And I've also got an investor question from a listener, actually. It was a listener. And I want to run through that because it follows on from last week, where I did a piece about elderly people investing. So it's a follow-up to that, which I thought was quite a nice thing to pick up on.
Good. Okay. Well, it seems we pretty much got sort of into the 80/20 2-year anniversary. And so should we start with that piece anyway? Because we were kind of halfway through going through it.
Yeah. So what happened, for anybody who doesn't know, who is a new listener to this podcast, because we're getting lots of new listeners now all the time, and we've had some fantastic reviews, aren't we? I mean, thank you to the people who are putting reviews on there. If you haven't done a review on iTunes, then please do so. We had a funny one this week where they said that they loved the podcast so much they are now listening to 5 a day. And to think you and I are as important to people's lives as fruit and veg, I think that is we need to pat ourselves on the back for that, Andy.
I mean, we've got to remember that my surname is a vegetable too, so they're really doubling down on the whole veg thing. So well done, Steph. Thank you.
Yeah. So what's happened? I run a DIY investment service, so I teach people how to invest their own money. Now, so for some people who want to get into investing, there are, of course, things like tracker funds, and there are things like our sponsor on this podcast, which you would have heard earlier. There are those sorts of services that are out there. But if you want to try and beat the market, or you want to try and maximise your returns for the minimum amount of effort, then that's why I created 80/20 Investor nearly 3 years ago now. And it was to teach people how they could run their money. And one of the big important parts of it is that the idea in the city is that if everybody thinks they're an investment genius, like fund managers, and there are some very clever people, but you can never make more money than they do because they invest your money, and therefore you have to assume they're always going to be right. What I tried to build, or what I did build with 80/20 Investor, was the idea that somebody could actually take the information and the fund data and tables and shortlists and the research and actually outperform me. And that it was a very tricky thing to do, but make it so it was affordable and only cost the price of a cup of coffee. So it's kind of like, I suppose it's a bit like trying to be it's like the Kung Fu master having a pupil that turns out to be Bruce Lee. It's like that. You want to be able to allow people to be able to go and do something that's even more amazing than you do. And so to prove the fact that what I was doing wasn't just me spouting nonsense, I decided I had to really invest money openly for people to see how I would do it. And actually, the 80/20 Investor is worth the small amount of money you pay for it, and it can make you profits. So I invested £50,000 of money that I pulled together 2 years ago, and that ties in nicely with the biennial subscription we had. And it was don't get me wrong, when I did it 2 years ago, I was quite nervous because it was right at the top of the market and it looked like the market would turn over. But actually, I'm always telling people you can't market time, as you know, Andy. So if I'm going to be a man of my word, I had to wade in with that money at that point and just ride the market up and down and it's based upon momentum. So I end up using a momentum type strategy to help ride the ups and downs. And so when I did the numbers and I pulled it all together this week, I ended up being up nearly, well, it's actually just now, I've just looked, it is almost bang on 19% on that £50,000. So it's now at £59,500. So I keep saying
that is amazing, Damien. Just take a minute there to think about that. 19%. People out there are scrabbling around trying to find savings accounts that can get them literally points of a percent just to try and, get some value for their money that's sitting around. You've taken that money, put your money where your mouth is, and got nearly 20%. Whereas what's the market sort of standard for that period over that time?
Well, the thing is, typically, I'm always going to be the guy who turns around and says to people, look, that's amazing. I'm not going to promise you're going to get 19% every 2 years, because it's reality. There was a difficult period for investing. I mean, when we're looking at it, I went back and looked at some of the other people out there and what some other strategies would have done. And, for example, if you'd gone to a typical financial advisor, there's benchmarks that are published, and there's one that's called the AFI benchmark, and there's a cautious portfolio and a balanced one. And, for example, the cautious one would have got you 10.5%. So it's one of those. My portfolio is towards the sort of middle to cautious end anyway, typically. And that's what they would have charged you on top of that, somewhere between 0.5% and 1% extra a year, which that figure doesn't take into account. There's also figures for what they call discretionary fund managers. So they're the managers that rich people get. So who come in and with their very posh offices, and they go in and they wine and dine them and invest all their large sums of money. And they got returned just over 9%. So, I mean, I'm chuffed to pieces that I beat those. I mean, there were some passive strategies that were equivalent that would have got you just over near enough 15%, which is good. But the point is that I was showing people that you could actually outperform all those things and the market by keep applying this strategy. But the thing is, 2 years is a very short period of time. So the real excitement, I know there are people out there who will be sitting there thinking, that's good that you did that. But the real excitement is going to be, for me, is the coming years, because it's compounding. When you start going, and it's going to be in 10 years' time when we're doing this podcast, Andy, when we're going to talk about some exciting figures, hopefully. That is, to me, because it's all about long term. It's not about 2 years. If you want to invest for 2 years, then you wouldn't be investing. You should just stay in cash. But this is a long-term project. But it's just to show people that for that biannual subscription, which costs the equivalent of £12 a month, so that's £288. I sat there and went, well, how much money would they have made? And of course, if you'd have been like me, I made £9,500 out of my portfolio. But if you'd had £100,000 and followed what I did, then you would have ended up making a profit of somewhere near enough, £18,000. If you'd had £250,000, you'd have made £47,000 profit. Of course, when you can work out net of this is all net of all fees and net of even that subscription for 80/20. That's why I'm so pleased, because like I said, the one where you had the so-called smart money in the investment banks, if you'd done 80/20 and followed maybe my portfolio, then you would have been £23,000 better off than if you'd gone with them, if you'd had £250,000. So it was really a moment I wanted to share with people why I'm so happy, why I have a headache today. And it was because we had a small drink. I was coerced into it to say, look, that is pretty great that you managed to do that, and you put your neck on the line. And do you know what? It theoretically could have gone wrong for you. And so there we go, Andy. It was a little bit of 80/20 investor promo, and I'm going to talk about it a bit more going forward, because now we've gone through that anniversary, is that there's something there that people can hang their hat on. And do you know what? People can't take that away from what we've done.
Brilliant, Damien. I'm going to go one further there, rather than just focus on those headline numbers, which of course it's a celebration because they are fantastic. I do want to highlight the work and the effort that goes into not just the research that you do, but it's the articles that you write around. So you don't just say to people, this is my recommendations. You put the research in, and then you tell people why. So what people can do, they're not just following what you're doing, they're learning as they go, and actually you're empowering them to make their own decisions going forward based on the knowledge that you're sharing. So it really is one of these things where it's an enjoyable process. It's not literally one of these things where it's not like a tracker where you're literally just tracking someone else and just following the leader. You're actually learning as you go along, and I think that needs highlighting as much as anything else. So
yeah, and Andy, that is the point. You're spot on that I want people to take away. It's not about following me, because most people don't follow what I do. I'm just proving a point, is showing people how to use the service. So that's why I do the portfolio. It's exactly as you say, that I do research articles and weekly commentaries and analysis that enable people to be able to do what they want with their money, and they can empower their decisions and make them confident to be able to make those choices. That is what it's all about. And of course, that's why there are people out there who get in touch who make much more money than I've done, which I love hearing, because that's what it's all about. And there are people who use 80/20 and then they come for the data, but they stay for the commentary. That could almost be our tagline. We've had people tell us that is, they come for the idea that the stuff that we produce, the analysis in terms of data, but it's actually the commentary is the reason why they stay. And so yeah, check it out. Everyone can get a free trial. I'll finish talking about it now, but everyone gets a free 30-day trial if they want to. Trust me, if you don't like it, then you can just stop. I'm not one of these people who I want everybody, if they engage with 80/20 Investor, to love it and have a positive experience. And it won't be for everybody, but it actually will be for most people.
Good. And while we're talking about it, just to really finish up on it, to get that free trial, where do they go?
Well, if you just go to the homepage, so moneytothemasses.com, and at the top of the page you will see a link that says become an 80/20 investor or join 80/20 investor, and that you go there and there'll be more information, FAQs, reviews, there's charts to show you what the 80/20 investor algorithm has done and stuff like that. So go and have a look.
Right, Damien, budget. We did promise the listeners that we were going to do a sort of budget in a nutshell type thing where you're going to round up the bits that people need to know. What do we need to know? I must admit, for the first time in a long time, this kind of passed me by. Was it sort of fairly underplayed in the media, or was it swept under the carpet, or did I just have my head buried in the sand?
No, I'm laughing because it was probably the good news for people out there in one regard. It was the almost biggest non-event in terms of budgets for years. There were, I mean, in the finance world, all of the financial advisors, the money journalists, they all go around their TV and sort of all excited about the budget, hoping they can appear incredibly clever afterwards to explain what the outcomes actually mean for people. I suppose not dissimilar to what I do actually, but what they do is what happened is that the Chancellor stood up and just basically told a whole load of jokes and then didn't announce too much. I'm going to come on to a couple of things he did announce. But, yeah, I was meant to do appear on another podcast that was a budget special. And we're going to talk through all the what was announced. And as soon as the budget finished, I obviously contacted them and said, yeah, I don't think there's much point doing a budget special. And everybody agreed. So the positive is there wasn't a lot announced. But obviously the negative, there probably could have been lots of things that could have been announced that weren't. So for some people who might even be looking at things to do with spending on NHS or whatever it is, or tax incentives, no, that wasn't there. But there's a big but. If it was a football match, the Chancellor went two-footed on self-employed people, which I probably am going to end up having a rant about slightly, but bear with me because there is a reason in this. What happened is the Chancellor has decided in the future. We've done a post on Money to the Masses, which is full of the bullet points, which you can go to and read up. But the Chancellor, one of the measures the Chancellor announced is that he was going to increase the national insurance contribution rate for self-employed people next year and a year after. So that was the big takeaway. And there was another announcement is that we talked about it in a previous podcast, but everyone gets what's called a dividend allowance. Okay, so if you get a dividend income from shares, for example, then you could get £5,000 of that tax-free. And there's a rates that go tax rates after that in bands, and it was originally created only last year by George Osborne as a bit of an incentive, but it was also to try and simplify the tax on dividends in a way, and a means of trying to stop people who form companies of themselves. They might, for example, there are people who might do jobs, so they might be TV presenters, and they turn themselves into a company, and then therefore they can pay themselves dividends and stuff like that, become directors, and therefore pay hardly any tax. That was very prevalent, and it was a way of trying to limit that. Now, what Hammond actually announced this week was that he was going to cut that allowance from £5,000 to £2,000. So for a lot of people out there, they might be thinking, yeah, so what? I don't care. I'm not self-employed. But the big thing to take away from this, even if you're not self-employed, is that what it shows is that the government, this is not a political podcast, I'm indifferent to the politics of things, but it just shows that what's happening is the government is pretty comfortable with going back on previous pledges. For example, the national insurance contribution rise could actually be claimed to have gone against their manifesto to win the election. They actually said they wouldn't raise taxes. So what it shows is the government is quite comfortable with going two-footed on anybody, and the fact that they did it on the self-employed, they could go back and quite equally change some of those pension freedoms that people are enjoying. And the reason they can do it is because at the moment there is no real opposition. As we all know, Labour seem to have gone into turmoil, and so therefore they know that there is unlikely to be an election. Even if there was, people would ultimately still vote for them. So it's kind of, if you're prone to switching off this section, it's just me highlighting to people that this just shows that everything is now up for grabs. And when we have subsequent autumn statements or any announcements from the government, then it's very likely that you're going to be some more uncomfortable tax changes. And I know that there's been talk of this national insurance contribution hike being delayed already because there was such uproar about it. But I just want to chuck in my 2 penneth worth on it, and I won't go on too long. But one of the things that I do think is slightly wrong about the move, the idea was they were trying to equalise the national insurance contributions paid by self-employed and employed people, and I get that, because they were trying to say, well, the pension, the state pension changed last year, so there's now a flat state pension. So national insurance contributions used to pay towards do pay towards funding the state pension, and previously self-employed people paid a lower rate because there used to be something called the state second pension. Now that's gone, and they weren't entitled to that, so that's why they paid lower rates. Now what's happened is that by trying to equalise it, they haven't actually equalised the benefits that self-employed people enjoy. So, for example, they don't get holiday pay, they don't get sick pay, they don't get access to things like childcare vouchers. So they might try and equalise the national insurance contributions, but therefore they would need to really, if they keep using the word fair, which was used quite a lot in the budget, they need to equalise the benefits self-employed people enjoy. And I know Hammond doesn't listen to this podcast. Well, I'm guessing he doesn't. So my one thing I would say is that it does strike me as slightly odd that you would go after, if we're going to leave the European Union and Brexit, and we're going to become a nation,
self-sustained,
a self-sustained nation of shopkeepers again, then it seems very odd that you're going to start to try and penalise those people. Because for people out there who self-employed people, a lot of people who are self-employed, do just employ themselves, but ultimately many go on to employ other people, so they build the companies of tomorrow. And in order to do that, they take on risks. So, for example, they don't have any of those benefits, holiday pay, sick pay, and they might give up some of the things like childcare vouchers. It's not all hard, because I know they do sometimes enjoy lower tax rates, or have in the past. But I would argue that is partly to compensate for the risks that they do take. And there are people who exploit that, I get that, and I think what they should do is go after those people rather than just doing a blanket, right, we're going to raise it for everybody. Because, for example, we talked last week about the new podcast we're doing, and it was like one giant leap, that leap of faith to be able to do Money to the Masses full time. Now, it wouldn't have made a difference, the tax rates changing. It won't do for a lot of self-employed people anyway, in terms of stopping them following their dream. But it sends a message that the country or the government doesn't want people to do that. And for me to be able to go self-employed and actually try and make Money to the Masses work, if we were constantly penalised and discouraged from doing so for whatever means, whether it's taxation or anything like that, then things like Money to the Masses wouldn't actually exist. So I think we should try and embrace that. And I know there are people who game the system, but you just have to go after those people and tighten the rules. And the reason as well I have a slight issue with it, because if you talk about fairness, in the very same week, Cafe Nero, it was revealed that they don't pay any corporation tax. So why are we going after the self-employed people where the coffee shops of this world aren't paying their fair share of tax? So anyway, that was the rant over. I apologise for people for ranting, but I think it's a point that needs to be made. But leading on from that, I want to give people a tip. Now, one of the things that in that was that the dividend tax rate was cut. So there'll be people who may have changed their investments so they get more dividend income because they make use of that allowance from last year, and then suddenly they're going, oh great, it's now all changed and I'm going to have to pay more tax on these dividends. One of the things you can get around it is you could do something what they call bed and ISA, which is you can ultimately sell your shares and buy them back within an ISA, so therefore your income will be tax free. And yes, there will be a tax charge on any profits, and you could incur stamp duty charges, but it does mean you could actually make your future income tax free. And the reason I mention it is that the ISA allowance is going to jump. It's currently, as we make this podcast, £15,240, but next tax year it's going to jump to £20,000. So you've got to be a nice extra almost £5,000 that you can use. So that's the tip I would take away from this budget special that I've done, is that there are ways around these changes. The national insurance, no, there's not, but it may not even come into effect. So I said there wasn't much to talk about. I appear to have spent a good probably 5-10 minutes talking about it, but there you go, Andy.
Good. Last piece was we were following on from something we talked about last week about people in retirement age and whether they should invest or not. Is that right?
Yeah. What it is, I got asked a question. Someone got in touch with me, and it was a follow-up from last week's question about where I talked about whether pensioners should invest. And I just want to read out the question quickly so it makes sense. And it says somebody's written in saying, I'm recently retired. I'm struggling to decide how best to invest my pension lump sum and other savings that we've accumulated over the years. I've always been somewhat risk averse, but becoming increasingly so in my advancing age. Savings accounts are giving poor returns and losing out to inflation, but I don't want to take risk investing in equities, etc. should a stock market correction be imminent. Do you have any further advice to offer? I don't want to wait for shares to recover, and I listened to your podcast last week regarding pensioners, blah, blah, blah. He goes on to say, I greatly respect my newly found, after much searching, financial advisor, and he's suggesting a cautious stock market portfolio, or maybe one that his firm could manage. But I can't face losing a significant percentage of our money at this stage in life. And then they asked me, have you got any additional advice? Now, It's an interesting question, that, and I would say to that person, hand on heart, I would, if that was my dad who was having that same scenario, given his concerns, I would say don't invest, because he has explicitly said he doesn't like the idea of risk at his stage in life. So why would he go into the stock market? And anybody who tries to push him into it, I would question as to why, particularly if they're selling you a product. The savings rates are poor, but that's life, unfortunately. There are services out there. For example, if you go onto our website and you look at the savings rate tables, we also produce a guide that you can look at 7 ways to boost your savings rate. And there is a service out there that is basically a concierge service, they call it, but really what they do is they do all the hard work to boost your returns by looking at all the savings accounts for you, do the paperwork, and so you can get that extra few £100 a year or whatever it is you need on top of the rates you're getting. So there are solutions, so go and have a look at that. If you go to the website and look at the savings rate tables, you'll find links through. On the stock market portfolio, I don't want to cast aspersions on that financial advisor because I don't know all the facts, and so I'm guessing he has these reasons to suggest it, although I don't know what they could be.
I could hazard a guess as to what those reasons could be. It's something to do with the colour of money, but carry on.
But one thing I would say is, if you're going to go into invest money at all and you're worried about that downside element, now one thing you could do is go, and people always talk to you about your potential return, so they will talk about how much money you could make, and they might build a portfolio and say, look, this portfolio has made X amount over a number of years. One of the things you might want to do is ask the person as well for something called like the max weekly fall figure, and it's sometimes called, you'll see things called the value at risk number. Ultimately what it tells you is the number that the most amount that your portfolio has probably fallen within a week. Though for most people, I wouldn't obsess about it because you want to ride that volatility. But if somebody is so cautious, then a good advisor or fund manager or whatever, this guy should be able to tell you what that figure is, so you walk into something with your eyes open, so you could sit there and see, look, do you know what? Yeah, there's a good chance I could lose 10% of my money in a given week, but of course it will bounce back probably. So you don't want that figure in isolation, because if you could in theory have a portfolio that fell 1% every week forever, and then it would only have a max fall of 1%, which sounds actually not that bad, but it's never made you any money. So you need how much money have they made in total in combination with that figure. And some people also look at something called drawdown, so what's the biggest fall that's happened. I mean, going back to my portfolio I was talking about earlier, and we see drawdowns that are large, that will be less than what you see in the stock market, because I don't invest totally in stocks, and less than what you'd get in a passive fund, for example, which do tend to just mirror the stock market. But it's those things, ups and downs, aren't bad, because that's how it's a bit like surfing. I always liken investing to surfing. You can't surf if there aren't any waves, and investing's the same thing when you're doing momentum investing. But this chap isn't doing that. He just wants to do something that's going to give him a steady, decent return, and therefore what he's after really is cash, or something that is a managed cash service.
Good stuff. Very well answered. I like the fact that you can be brave and basically say, do you know what, investing's in the market isn't perhaps for them. I think a lot of people, they're searching for an answer that's always, yes, you can do it, and this is how you do it. Actually, it's quite brave to sit back and go, well, no, I wouldn't do it, and actually cash is okay.
Yeah, do you know what? I'm a real advocate of that. And I was talking to people who, I don't know if people remember, but my brother works with me on Money to the Masses. He's one of the team behind me that helps, and he's one of the main people. And I laugh and joke with him about how much time I actually spend with 80/20 Investor. Quite often tell people not to use it, or dissuade them, and they still want to go through with it. And I explain, because people should enter into anything with their eyes open, and if somebody genuinely can explain to you the reasons why you might not want to do something, then that is, to me, ethical and positive, because salesmen always focus on the positives. They'll always tell you the good stuff, but they don't tell you the bad stuff. And that's why all the FCA warnings are in small print, and the FCA make sure they have to be there, but they don't mean anything to most people because they don't read them. If you want to, it's the ISA season at the moment, and if you want to take out an ISA, that you could get as many as 40 pages of kind of T's and C's that come with just opening a simple stocks and shares ISA. No one reads that, and actually, because if you did, a lot of it doesn't make a lot of sense to many people. It's like any legal document. You read through it and it just is repetitive and actually makes you lose the will to live. So that's why they just don't tell you the downside, because they go, it's all in the small print. Anyway, I've gone off on a tangent.
Yeah, I did a very similar thing this week where my daughter's looking for tickets to see Annie. Now, if you've ever tried to book tickets in London, it's not an easy thing. You can't just go to the theatre to buy the tickets. They use all sorts of different companies and then sell them to all these various people, because at the end of the day, they want to fill the seats. So they go to all of these different ticket sites and they buy up blocks, and then it's up to them to basically fill the theatres. So I ended up going through about 10 different sites, and I chose the site that was the most honest. And that's honest. It was actually ended up costing me slightly more for the tickets, but you could go on their site and you could actually click on the seat that you were buying from them, and you could see reviews and a view from that seat to the theatre. And it would say, this is slightly restricted. There's a slight overhang here. Here's a picture of a previous user that had posted online. And I just think that's good. I actually paid more through that site for their honesty, and there's something in that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, people, if you are honest, I remember we talked about that Honest John website. Do you remember years ago? It talks about cars and stuff like that, and I loved it when I was trying to buy a car, because I know nothing about cars, and it just tells you everything about them, and that it does work. I mean, equally, it seems to be in the world of football that the restrictive view thing doesn't seem to exist. If you go to Tottenham, there are restrictions in the current stadium. And you buy a seat and you buy a ticket, and it won't actually tell you that it's got a certain restriction, because they have to. There's normally it's a certain percentage of your view has to be blocked. Right. And actually, there is one point in the stand that's just along for me. So anybody I know there's quite a few people who go to Tottenham who listen to this podcast. You can work out where I am in the ground when I tell you this. In one stand, there are 2 pillars that run up into the roof to hold the roof up. But those pillars, for certain seats, they won't be restricted, because they're quite narrow. But at certain places, that pillar, in your view, runs straight up the middle of the goal. So you cannot see, you spend your game not being able to see the goal. Yeah, but I don't think that's not classed as restricted. I know there's been lots of other examples where people pretty much can't see a game and have been charged a full price, and Tottenham's expensive. Anyway, I've veered off again.
Good. Well, we're done. Podcast all done. If you want to get in touch with Damien, then do so. It's Damien at moneytothemasses.com. He's on Twitter, of course. It's at moneytothemasses with the number 2. And please write a review if you can.
Yeah, sorry, Andy. I went over the top of you there. But the reason I did that is I'm getting quite a few questions now. People are realising that, do you know what? If you write to Damien on Twitter, he writes back. And it's quite good fun, because we get some questions and people can get direct access. So do it. Even just say hello. And just to say, is this Damien? Yeah. Don't be abusive, but just write to me. And I'm like,
you even reply when you've got a headache and a headache.
Yeah.
Right, until next week.
Till next week. Bye.
Bye.
Don't forget to claim your free copy of Damien's best-selling book, The 30-Day Money Plan. Sort your finances in just 5 minutes a day, worth $4.99. Just go to moneytothemasses.com/podcast to find out how.